If this is an arcade stick, and if this is a pad, then what is this thing? For the longest time, you really needed an arcade stick if you wanted to play fighting games. But times have changed. Pad is the controller most people are going to start with, and that's purely because it's in the box when you buy the console. But the pad you get in the box almost certainly doesn't look like this. Feast your eyes on the newest hybrid, the PadBox GS. Pad on the left side and arcade stick on the right side, this controller has a gimmick that's a bit of a game changer: analog sticks. It's for this very reason that the PadBox makes an insanely bold claim: one controller for every game. Now, I've made it my business to rip these kinds of claims to shreds, so can this oversized pad with bells and whistles really become my one controller for every game? Let's find out. To test whether the PadBox lives up to its claim, we're obviously going to have to start with some fighting games. The main features we'll be taking advantage of then will be this precision crafted ergonomic grip with the ultra clicky D-pad, 8 arcade style buttons, and 1 shoulder button here on the left. Now, given that this is clearly a 3D printed controller, I was a little bit skeptical about the ergonomics, but after some significant playtesting, I have to say, this is actually really comfortable. More importantly, it positions your thumb over the D-pad, which I call the regular position. But if you're goofy and you're coming from the Xbox or Switch controller, you might expect the analog stick and the D-pad to be switched. First of all, that's just wrong. And secondly, no, actually, there is no second point. By the way, just want to point out, first of all, that this controller was provided free of charge for the purposes of making this video, but I don't have to say anything specific about it. I don't have to send it back at the end, and all opinions are my own. The D-pad itself is unlike most pad controllers in that every direction is completely separate. PlayStation controllers look like this, but underneath the directions are actually connected and balanced on a pivot. Now, if you prefer that style of D-pad, then you're in luck, because this is an alternate D-pad that's also included in the box. To finish off the left side, we also have a single shoulder button here, which you can remap to anything you like thanks to GP2040 firmware. It's the right side of this pad where things really start to get interesting. Players coming from an arcade stick will feel right at home with the 8 arcade-style buttons, which house user-replaceable chalk V2 key switches. They're also spread out in a noir-esque layout, which means that your fingers will generally land right on top of each button without any kind of awkward stretching. So does it work for fighting games? Well, it's a little bit confusing at first, but in many ways, this is the dream controller. The clicks of the D-pad are reassuring and super satisfying to press, and these arcade-style buttons on the right means that you have literally all the benefits of an arcade layout. All of your fingers are available for pressing complex button combinations, and you have the ability to press 2 buttons at once with only a single finger for common commands like throws or activating. And my personal favorite, but only really necessary for older fighting games, the ability to double tap, which is, of course, objectively the correct way to intimidate your opponent at a tournament during the button check. That being said, this form factor does come with a few caveats. With a regular pad, you can hold it in any imaginable position and generally still be able to press everything, but the PadBox GS means that you have to treat it more like an arcade stick. That means that you're no longer gripping it with your right hand as well as your left hand. You're going to have to rest it on your leg to hold it in place. You'll also have to get used to playing with your hand to the side. With a normal pad, you'll usually have it right in front of you, but the PadBox does have to rest on your leg, and so you always have to have it a little bit off to the side, so it's on your right leg or on your thigh somewhere. You'll get used to it, but it's just something that you should know ahead of time. Now, there's plenty more to be said about the PadBox GS for fighting games, but remember that claim, one controller for every game. It's time for... Alright, this is gonna be good. Let's jump! Yes! Yep, it's the only Sonic game that ever mattered. Oh, wow, that was terrible. Oh yeah, this is how it's done. Let's grind up this rail. Why would I want to dedicate money just to a fighting game controller when I could buy a controller that does multiple things? Oh, why did I just run away from that thing? There is actually a round attachment that I can add to the analog stick. Very easy to do that. It comes with these. They look like, as far as I can tell, these look like pretty off-the-shelf parts. It helps for the most part, but I do feel like I'm kind of slipping off it. Where's the next jump? None? Ouch! I got hit by the... I don't know if I've ever been hit by this truck. As you can see, this game does work for Sonic Adventure, Would I play it like this normally? Well, I could. Vampire Survivors. The most important thing about this game, of course, is that you can use the analog stick. I would not be able to do this if I didn't have an analog stick on my controller. Weirdly, I'm not able to face left. Maybe I need to go into the software and recalibrate them. What I've done is I've edited the dead zone. That ended up being a little more challenging than I was expecting. If I'm going left and then I let go, if I let go of left like this, I sometimes end up facing right. Going left, facing right. Alright, so I've done the firmware update just to make sure that it's not that. And I feel like it is a little bit better, but obviously if you flick the stick like this, he still does face the wrong direction. Shmups. With this kind of game, there are a number of techniques where you can like hold down two buttons at the same time and use turbo modes in order to like get like the top scores. But being able to lounge around on the couch, use a analog stick instead, but still have access to these giant buttons, that does actually feel pretty darn cool. This is a great controller for this kind of game because I'm really enjoying not having to like sit at a giant arcade stick and being able to still be able to like press the buttons like this, because the other thing is that for a game like this you want arcade style layout so that you don't have to worry about using your thumb to like press multiple buttons at the same time. Man, I miss games like this. We really do not have enough games like this anymore. Is Cave still in business? I hope they are. JDM. I think I have to deliver sushi. That's my mission here. I've got my car, which has an accelerator pedal that goes from 0 to 100, and that's it. Obviously, I have no analog control over my trigger button here, so I'm either accelerating or I'm not. My brakes do not appear to be very effective. One thing I like about this game is how the lighting and the graphics really do make you feel like you're driving around in Japan. This is quite cool that I can use my fighting game controller with my analog stick down here, and I can I can play the game, but honestly, if I were doing any like serious drifting, this is like, it's not possible really to drift seriously using this controller. Obviously this is not the way it's supposed to be done. Okay, so drifting, probably not this controller's forte. Next, being able to play a puzzle game with a split D-pad is actually quite nice because you know that you're not accidentally going to press up or down when you're absolutely only pressing left or right. Let's see if I can remember how to do GTR. Because it's got clicky buttons, it does very subtly slow down the movement of the controller coming back up. So normally when I'm playing a puzzle game, I'd like to like very rapidly press this button, and I feel like every button press is taking ever so slightly longer because I'm doing it with clicky buttons. For casual play, it feels really nice to use clicky buttons. No! Obsessed with getting GTR, hold on. Because you've got your hands like this, and you can feel like a lot of tension in your hand from being stuck in this position. If I were to use this controller for casual games, I'd have to get used to like playing my casual games, but with my hand in sort of a loose overhand position. If at most resting my fingers on the buttons, but not like having them locked in place, because I feel like that's doing awful things to my tendons. Let's do it, GTR, let's go! 3, 4, 5, 6. That is my absolute limit.
Go ahead and pick a car.
Alright, it's time to make some crazy money. I do not remember it being this hard. I remember having a slightly more nuanced control back in the day. So for a game like maybe Crazy Taxi, not as big a deal that actually you don't really have analog sticks, analog control of the shoulder buttons, the shoulder triggers, because in this game you're never really doing anything finely, any finely tuned accelerating, or at least I don't think you do. Maybe that's where I've been playing this game wrong this whole time. You have to think about what buttons you're going to be holding down for a long time, because arcade buttons are not the sort of thing that you really hold down for a long time. I feel like with arcade buttons, usually you come down and you hit them once. But in a racing game, I'm like holding down my ring finger, also like pressing other buttons, multiple buttons at the same time, doing button combinations. Not designed for Crazy Taxi, but the fact that I can play Crazy Taxi on it is a bonus. Okay, so this controller clearly has one main weakness, and it's the lack of analog triggers. For most games, this is not an issue, but if you play racing games or FPS games that require more nuanced control of the triggers, this might not be the controller for you. But if you play a lot on Switch, then actually it might be fine because Switch controllers don't accept analog trigger input anyway. The other obvious con is that it's wired only. For fighting games, that's fairly common, but it wants to be the one controller for every game, so it really ought to work when I'm lounging around on my sofa. If I'm far away from my TV, I'll probably just end up using one of my wireless controllers instead. Weaknesses aside, I'd say the PadBox GS is incredibly well built for a 3D printed controller. 3D printing is usually a way to prototype some really experimental stuff, but the way that the PadBox GS has been designed, it really feels like even if they made a mass-produced model, I don't think there would actually be that many changes. Even swapping out the D-pad was a fairly painless process, though I have to admit that the shoulder button is actually held in place by the PCB holder on the inside, and maybe that's clever from an engineering standpoint, but as a consumer just trying to swap the D-pad out myself, it was kind of tricky. Now the challenge in this video was to see if the PadBox GS can truly work for every game, which is a preposterous idea from the get-go. But getting serious, this is obviously designed to solve an age-old fighting gamer problem. We want the benefits of an arcade stick, but we want it to be small and portable, like a pad controller. Many have tried to make small lever-based arcade sticks, but they usually run into the same problems every time. Levers are just harder to use when the case itself is small and light. The PadBox GS assumes that you're okay with using a D-pad, and as long as you're okay with that aspect, you're getting the best of both worlds, really. If you're mostly looking at this as a fighting game controller, here's the lowdown. The split D-pad feels great. It takes some getting used to because discrete buttons for each direction means that you have to consciously release directions that would normally be released automatically by a traditional D-pad. This means in theory you could run into SOCD issues like on a leverless controller, but once you're used to it, I found this to be a non-issue. The disc-style D-pad is great, and originally I preferred it because the split D-pad buttons felt a little bit loose, but it's a little bit too sensitive, so I found it difficult to tap forward twice to dash for things like drive rush, and I'd accidentally get an up or down movement as well. I think there's some work to be done here, but I have every confidence that the creator of the PadBox GS intends to keep improving it and releasing new D-pads that you can swap in. Sometimes pad controllers have an issue where they'll skip the neutral down input when you're going past it in a circular motion, but this is not an issue on the PadBox GS. On the split D-pad, it's technically possible to skip neutral down if you really force it to make it happen, but in general, it wasn't an issue for me. SOCD works like you would expect. Pressing a cardinal direction on the analog stick will cancel out any simultaneously opposing cardinal direction on the D-pad. Inside the controller, it uses GP 2040 firmware, which is great because it's community-based, so you don't have to rely on proprietary software that might disappear over time. That being said, there's no screen on this controller anywhere, which makes it a little bit more difficult to make quick on-the-fly adjustments like you might do with recent leverless controllers, which usually have a screen built in. Should also point out that there's no dedicated tournament lock switch, which is usually fine on a pad controller, but because it's used a bit more like an arcade controller where you actually have your hand coming down from a height, it's a little bit more likely that you'll accidentally press some of these options buttons, and they're very close to the action buttons. Probably not a major issue, but would be nice in the future version to have a tournament lock switch. So, in the end, could the PadBox GS be my one controller for every game? No, but if you've always disliked the idea of switching to pad because it's tiny and fiddly, then this is honestly an amazing solution. It doesn't feel like some 3D printed prototype, it's built like something you could seriously use and rely on in a tournament, and the other main benefit is that even if you are mostly a fighting gamer, being able to play games that need analog sticks without having to bring a second controller means that you can slip friction-free from your main game into some other game that's fun and casual. That alone feels like a reason enough to give the PadBox GS a serious look. Listen, that's all from me today. I've been NihongoGamer. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you real soon.